Most heartfelt greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. I eagerly welcome you to Sturgeon's most premier station, Dusk Light Radio. Now, normally, this is the moment where I tell you all my spiel about how it's hosted by yours truly, and I go into my detail about the events of the Blackwell family and the ongoings within the specialties that we house here at the Dusklight Radio. However, I am about to take a little sojourn, just for a few days, and in that time, I did not want to leave you hanging, so I made a couple phone calls, and for the next 3 to 4 transmissions, you will be catered to and lovingly looked after by my twin sister, Evelynn L. Blackwell. Now I'm going to pass over hosting duties to Evelynn, and I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time with her, and I'll see you again when the sun sets and dusk enters the station. Take it away, sister.
Most heartfelt greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. I eagerly welcome you to Sturgeon's most premier station, Dusklight Radio. As my dear brother has already said, this week it shall be hosted not by your usual host, Everett J. Blackwell, but by your exactingly eloquent, reliably resourceful, and, well, your awfully adaptable host, Evelynn L. Blackwell. Thank you all for having me. Now, Everett gave me a script to follow, something about anglerfish, and a diligently compiled conspiracy board about Jackal Blackwell, which I'm sure is nothing to worry about, but, oh my. Unfortunately, it seems that I've misplaced both somewhere in the station. I suppose we'll be going off book for the moment. Well, that's all right. I've been told, namely by the great Spider Lord themselves, may his legs continue to multiply, that my improv is actually quite passable. So, well, perhaps you've heard of us Blackwells? I, for instance, was the first Blackwell family-trained opera singer to grace the ears of Sturgeon. And that does not include Tabitha Blackwell, who gained quite the reputation for a while of moaning a combination of low dirges and television static sounds in the caves beneath Sturgeon, convincing its landside dwellers that perhaps an ancient eldritch beast had finally awoken from the depths to devour the atmosphere and strip the entire population of their flesh and bones, all because she got the wicked soundtrack in her head. Honestly. Now, my most popular work, well, I don't want to brag, but you may have heard it before, perhaps even on this very radio station. It's just a little tune called 277 of the Most Popular Ways to Carve a Rotisserie Chicken, and it's quite a catchy one if I do say so myself. Why, I even saw Papa Caio in the crowd on opening night with a tear in his eye. Or maybe that was blood. Or bone. It actually may not have even been him, I don't know. It's hard to tell on stage. Look around the city next time you go for the Opera House. Now that you know it exists, it should just be down the corner from your house, where you can look at it and go, wow, I grew up here and I never knew this place existed. Because it hadn't. It hadn't until you envisioned it. Isn't it fun how powerful the mind can be? Anyway, I am not Dusklight's main host, but today I am its mostly dead counterpart. Thanks to a long-standing favor which my brother decided to so graciously call in, I'm doing my part and stepping in while he takes his well-deserved respite, to assure that you all don't miss a single second of all the premium Sturgeon content your little ears can handle. This week, at least, I'll be reading you tales that Everett and his wonderful many-legged runners collect from the far corners of Sturgeon and beyond. Some of them will make you laugh, some will make you cry, and some... Well, I don't have the script to tell you what the others may do, but let's all just assume it's nasty. Wait. Hold on. The station door just opened. Perhaps it's an intern here to bring me a new script. Hello? What the? Clue? Clue, is that you? Listeners, Clue Blackwell has just entered the station and, well, I'd say I was glad to see him, except I've never officially met them a day in my life. You see, Clue is a statue that stands at the forefront of the Blackwell estate. A regal depiction of a legendary family member who is blindfolded and holding a placard that simply reads, "Oh no," in all capital letters. As I recall, a prophecy somewhere in our libraries foretold that Clue will only gain animation when the apocalypse is coming. This can't be good. I need to make a call. Yes! Hello, Clue? Please have a seat. I'll get you a glass of water. I'm sure you must be parched. Listeners, while I look into this, let's get you looking into our story for this evening. This tale, called No Name November, is a classic Sturgeon tale from long ago. It's written by, well, for some reason the name T.J. Lee is scribbled here in purple crayon, and then it's crossed out, and in a slightly darker purple crayon it says Janitor Awesome right above it, so I'm not really sure what that's about, but yeah, let's go with that. I believe TJ also lent his voice to both Frankie and Phil in this tale, which is of course being narrated by yours truly, Evelynn L. Blackwell, the frontmost spirit voice in both position and prestige. Special thanks must be given first to Mandy Moe for rendering my brother Everett in the beauteous image you see when you look at our page. Really, Everett? Beauteous. And to @Mitsuru on Twitter for gracing you all with my spiritual beauty. Lastly, our music is provided with permission by Cryo Chamber, Envato Elements, the Nobody YouTube channel, and the Dark Somnium with gracious thanks. If you enjoy these intros and want to see more, please ensure you've got notifications on and leave a comment for every video you encounter. With that, the sun has set and dusk has crawled into the studio once more. Whether you're working, prepping to sleep, or evading the formless void that will one day consume us all, Blackwell is here to soothe your ears and captivate your soul. Now close your eyes and take a deep breath. The scene has been set and the light is on. It's time to walk towards it.
Sorry, new kid. You're last in today, so you're our candidate this year.
The kid in front of our classroom door relaying this to me looked a mixture of pitied and relieved. His nose, taped over, and a black eye immediate standout features. I was later told his name was Frank, and the damage was a result of a fight with a kid in the grade above us for calling his mom a slut. He didn't make eye contact with me directly, instead drawing his attention to my shirt, a Legend of Zelda fan art piece adorning the center.
Man, this sucks. We could have been friends.
The slight hurt in his voice was not even remotely close to how shut out I was already feeling. First day in a new school, desperate for a fresh start and doing my best to make a good impression. Totally out the window. This doesn't seem fair, I protested, knowing this may just be an elaborate prank on the new girl. I wasn't about to deal with being a joke on day one. Look, let me introduce myself. My name is Zoe Hartwell. He shook his head, some of his friends seated in the class behind him leaning forward, genuine shock rippling across their faces as if I'd bitten the head off a small animal.
No, this isn't how it works, new kid. This isn't just a class thing, it's a community thing.
He looked back hesitantly, and the class nodded, no semblance of glee or cruelty on their faces. I dare say for a bunch of 12-year-olds they were downright forlorn at the prospect. He sighed and continued.
Sturgeon has this every November, and the rules are simple. The last one into a community function is the no name for the month.
He leaned in and spoke quietly.
Just bear with it and we'll be friends afterwards, okay? I'm sorry. I really am.
With that, he took a seat, and I shuffled into the room, a sea of completely apathetic faces staring straight ahead. I'd made an effort to look my best self in spite of a new environment, hoping it would make a good first impression. But instead of being invited to speak by the teacher, the room fell silent until I sat down at the back, next to a fogged-over window and a small supply cupboard. I was in disbelief the teacher joined in on it, not glancing in my direction or checking her register to see if I was present. Even after the bell rang and we went to recess or lunch, I was a non-entity. People didn't walk through me or shove me out of the way, but they didn't go out of their way to assist me if I fell over or give me alternative food when I brought up that my file says I have a deathly allergy to peanuts. Every fiber of me wanted to cry, to scream that I was desperate to be acknowledged and that I wouldn't hurt anyone. But I choked back the emotions piling up in my throat, slung my bag over my shoulder, and resolved to just read or play some video games on my recess if this was how it was going to be. Different school, different traditions, same bullshit. My parents had jobs in the journalism industry, and moving around for promotions or alternative contracts was their forte. By the time I was nearly 13, I had moved to 5 different schools and I'd become accustomed to the changes. Most kids become jaded and try not to make connections with others, knowing they'll just be gone in a year or less anyway. But I had this innate desire to connect with people and make the most of my situation. I couldn't help myself. That's what made this so much harder. I probably would have caved in after day 2 if Phil hadn't shown up. It was the beginning of what already felt like a lifelong routine. I sat down at my desk and began to let my mind wander, focusing on what I'd enjoy playing when I got home, making some comfort food and joining my mom at the gym after so I didn't feel gross. I idly doodled a sketch of me holding a master sword high, a bolt of lightning striking at the hilt and electrifying me in a comical fashion.
Ha, that's awesome, dude. What's your favorite game in the series? I'd say mine's the newest one. My mom got it for me last Christmas, but I haven't had a chance to play in a while.
The jubilant voice cut through the air as if a firecracker had been let off by my ear, his positivity irradiating through me and borderline making me jump out of my seat with excitement and confusion. Startled at the notion of someone talking to me, I snapped my pencil, and the entire room froze. The boys at the front next to Frankie turned to him and whispered, the slightest of side glances in my direction, and they shook their heads at the both of us before turning back. I turned to look at him, and I saw a mess of spiky black hair, a dusty red flannel shirt with sleeves underneath, the sweatshirt logo a Dark Souls reference. He looked like a kid completely out of time, but very comfortable in himself. He smiled at me and seemed to be waiting for my reply, but for that brief moment, words had failed me. Twilight Princess, I stammered, my hands fumbling over one another. I really like the dark plot, and Midna's so cool. I was confused, but the joy of conversation overtook me, and I decided that if I'm going to be ignored for tradition's sake, I may as well get it over with now. I'm Zoe, by the way. Zoe Hartwell. But instead of being repulsed, his eyes lit up. He beamed at me, offering out a hand adorned with various faded concert tags and festival markers.
I'm Phil Faulty. Good to meet you, man.
He gave me a fist bump before leaning back on his chair, the hinges squeaking as he put the rubber of his pencil to his lips, tapping it contemplatively as he studied me. The lesson around us seemed to continue without any notice of our discussion.
You're the new no-name, aren't you?
He said after a few moments. My face sagged, and I felt the inevitable rejection imminently approaching. Yeah, I guess you don't want to be friends now, huh? I said, my body language matching my face as I hunched over my work, preparing to just draw silently for the rest of the day, A friendship dead on arrival. To my surprise, he leaned forward with a satisfying thump and turned towards me, still smiling.
Nah, I was the no-name last year. I know how it goes.
He declared almost matter-of-factly, the positivity refusing to leave his voice once. But Frank and his friends said that this is tradition, I replied, nudging my head towards him as he took notes from the class. He didn't seem like a nasty kid so much as just one caught up doing what was asked of him. Phil made an audible acknowledgement before turning back to me.
Well, he's not wrong. This is tradition, but, well, I always wished I had a friend throughout that shit, and I guess I just want to do it for you, you know?
I immediately felt more comfortable around him, and the more he spoke, the bolder I felt. Won't they, cast you out again permanently or beat you up? He laughed, shaking his head.
Nah, nothing like that. But even if there were punishments, it wouldn't matter. I'm not really all that acknowledged around here lately anyway, so no harm done.
He patted my shoulder before the bell rang and the class shuffled out for lunch. I saw a chance to bond and decided I had nothing to lose. Phil, I brought my lunch from home since the stuff here I'm allergic to. Want to split it and play some Animal Crossing? He smiled, so sincerely, nodding silently as I grabbed my stuff before heading for the door.
What happens if you eat the food here? Does your head swell up and burst?
He asked, imitating the sound of a popping balloon with blood chunks spraying everywhere. I laughed for the first time since I got to this town. No, nothing like that. I just choke and die without an EpiPen. Come on, let's go. I'll even let you visit my town if you promise not to dig holes in the garden, I said, teasing him with a jovial grin.
I wouldn't dream of it. There's never anything good to find in secret holes anyway.
He dryly replied before shoving me and laughing at his own terrible joke. The next 2 weeks were comparable bliss to those first few days. While the rest of the class refused to acknowledge me and even some store attendants around town would only take my money and nothing more, I felt it to be tolerable with Phil by my side. He'd show me around the school and tell me all the best hiding spots, sharing legends I was 99% certain he made up to impress me, but I didn't care. He made me feel like I mattered, and it was something I steadily realized very few people had done in my life to that point. I took it to heart and made a point to ask my parents and my older brother in college about their days, spend more time with them, and learn things I'd have never thought to ask before. As we reached the end of the month, I decided to make him a drawing of the two of us hanging out in a treehouse filled with treasures and weapons. Some days before, he'd confessed Adventure Time was one of his favorite shows to me, and how much he missed it since he didn't get cable anymore. As the final days of No Name November were in sight, I was determined to show my gratitude to him and remind him we were best friends after this was over too, even if that meant he was stuck with me. I made my way down the hall. I was running late thanks to a doctor's appointment, and the silence was as unsettling as the details you often ignore when your mind is occupied by conversations, drama, and the walk to your next lesson. Now I was conscious of the echo my footsteps made, the tributes to someone on the walls across the lockers, flowers and spikes covering one person's locker further down the hall from my room. I decided I'd take a look later on and maybe Phil could shed some light on what happened. I came in to the sound of utter silence, the entire group already deep in reading time and the teacher herself perusing what looked to be like an Edgar Allan Poe novel. I sheepishly made my way to the back where Phil sat, his back against the supply closet and anxiety painted across his face. Dude, what's wrong? Did the girl you like look in your direction? Dork, I said, playfully punching him and smiling, something he did not reciprocate. In the years following this, I have never seen such a paradoxical expression. He was anxious, miserable, and accepting all at once, as if each face was jostling for the spotlight on his face and he was powerless to control which one came out. He flashed me a smile before a grimace replaced it, his knee twitching incessantly.
Zoe, I'm leaving today. I'm being transferred.
He looked so ashamed of himself, but he didn't break his eye contact with me.
I knew from the moment we spoke that I'd be leaving at the end of the month, but I wanted so badly to stay with you and be friends that I just...
His eyes welled up and he sniffed, wiping them with his sleeve.
I'm sorry. I was being selfish. I just didn't want you to think I'd abandoned you when everyone else is still ignoring you.
I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to yell at him for keeping it from me, to slap him even. But I knew how important this last day was, and I took in a deep breath before flexing my fingers on the table in front of me, grabbing my textbook and putting the drawing I made on his desk. The tension in his body ceased as he held it up and stared at it. For a moment, I couldn't see his face, but I could hear him whimpering. He held it to his chest and with his eyes closed simply said,
"Thank you, Zoe."
We spent that final day making terrible jokes at each other's expense, making plans to stay in touch that we knew we could never truly keep, and sharing a hug that lasted a little bit too long. His arm draped over my shoulders as we sat in the hall and waited out the last few minutes before the final period. I meant to ask, I saw something in the halls and it looked like there was a kind of tribute on one of the lockers. What's that all about? I asked, knowing I'd probably forget if the school really did start talking to me soon after.
Oh, that? Well, that's my locker. They heard I was leaving and guess they wanted to give me a good send-off. Pretty sweet, right? I've come a long way from the kid in the crawl space.
He laughed heartily and I chuckled, not sure what he meant and assuming it was an embarrassing time in his life, not wishing to pry. The bell rang and we made our way to the door. Everyone else had already shuffled in as we lingered outside, preferring to go in once the class had settled.
Hey, if you don't mind, Zoe, I'm gonna dip here,
he said, the positivity now with an air of reluctance.
I'm not big on goodbyes, and I don't want the class to sing me out. I don't need anyone seeing me in tears as their last memory.
I felt my heart sink, but I nodded and wrapped my arms around him. You will always be my best friend, Phil. No matter what else happens, okay? I said through muffled sobs. He chuckled.
I know. You too. And hey, if you ever need to be reminded of me, you can just go to my hiding spot. You'll always be able to think of me that way.
He took me by the shoulders and wiped the tears away, kissing my forehead. I felt a surge of butterflies as he smiled at me.
Check the crawl space. You'll know what you're looking for. You got a bright future ahead of you, Zoe. Just make sure you're never here studying alone, okay? You never know what kind of weirdos will try their luck. And you're too cool to end up with one of them.
He flashed me a grin before backing off and running down the hallway, turning the corner and disappearing from my life once and for all. I took a few moments to recompose myself before going back into the class to the sound of thunderous applause and smiles. Every student that I would have once described as a gray shell of apathy, now all full of their own vibrant colors. Freckles and curly hair jutted out at me. Accents and body types I was oblivious to before, now suddenly immediately obvious. At the front, the teacher and Frank stood with smiles on their faces, Frank outstretching a hand that I took on autopilot.
Congrats, Zoe! You made it to the end of No Name November and you didn't crack once! You're officially a member of the community now!
He leaned in closer.
And I'm honestly so sorry about this. I really did, do want to be your friend, you know? I hope I can make it up to you.
I looked at them with such confusion, happy but utterly bewildered at the display they'd put on. This is great, and I'm glad we can all talk now. But isn't this for Phil? The room's atmosphere changed in an instant. Some students looking at me with terror while others looked away. One girl began to tremble as her friend held her. Frank went pale and looked at me with a look I couldn't immediately place.
Zoe, where did you hear that name?
I half laughed. The prank obviously still not over. Dude, his locker is adorned outside and he told me himself he was leaving. I assumed that's what all this was for. I waved my hands around the room, laughing. The room felt so cold as the teacher stood up, shaking as she approached me, kneeling down to my level and speaking in a low voice with an ungodly amount of severity. "Zoe, this is really important. Where did you hear all this?" I felt immediately on edge. I was obviously old enough to know something was wrong, and I wasn't the type to lie. "If Phil is in trouble for skipping, I don't want to be the one to get him into crap before he starts his new school," I began. Her eyes widened as she motioned me to go outside with Frank, instructing the rest of the class to stay in there as we spoke outside. I could see Frank shaking, holding back tears as the teacher tried to calm him.
"Zoe, that locker isn't for Phil leaving. He went missing a year ago."
Frank's voice was trembling and his composure was rapidly failing him.
He's my brother. I don't know what happened to him, but if you know anything at all, Zoe, please."
I never heard the register being called out in class, so I never noticed the last name. My knees felt weak. I never looked at the posters adorning the locker rooms that said, "Missing since 2010. My stomach turned over and every emotion was turning into bile. I never inspected the locker that was covered in tributes from classmates and teachers. My vision began to blur as I leaned against the locker and began breathing heavily, the teacher trying to keep me calm as Frank looked on, confused but distraught. "Supply closet. Crawl space," I breathed over and over as I felt my body give out and the sounds of rushing filled my ears before a series of frantic bangs, screaming, and alarms rang out to black. Phil had gone missing during his own nomination of No Name November. He'd been silently working away for the first couple of weeks, walking home with his little brother Frank every day while their mom was working a double shift to pay the bills. One day, he simply didn't meet Frank to walk home, and it took Frank nearly 12 hours to report his brother missing, due to his mother's second job working nights at the bar. I was cleared very quickly of any suspicion since I had only come into the state a month prior and I wasn't mentally able to deal with the conversation of Phil not being real. They chalked it up to hearing from someone else at school and launched an investigation. This, of course, yielded nothing. Phil had been stuffed into a crawl space behind the supply closet in the class. They still don't know how he got there or if someone put him there. Rumors spread that he'd simply fallen asleep and gotten stuck. I wanted so badly to believe them, and so did everyone else. But the look of abject horror on his mummified face, half-caved-in skull, and tear marks on his trademark flannel betrayed that theory entirely. I moved schools again soon after and went a few miles south to an all-girls school. Socializing became something I struggled massively at, but Frankie helped with that. Understanding one another's grief brought us closer, and inevitably we ended up together, now looking at starting a family of our own in this town that still carries on the tradition of No Name November. I think about Phil's fate a lot. How someone who was forgotten by the town at the age of 13 was able to successfully vanish overnight. I think about how powerful a name and an identity can be to someone in a world where it's so easy to slip under the cracks through your own volition or someone else's. And as I look over a sea of unmarked graves in my town, I think about how lucky I am to have had someone like Phil guiding me, to ensure I survived my own No Name November, to ensure I wasn't forgotten too. Okay, never fear, listeners. I found my script. I think whenever its runners left earlier in search of stories, they must have knocked it under the desk. Typical. It's a good thing I found it when I did. Improv skills or not, I was not going to be able to make up that many names for the outro. I can think of maybe 2 max. I'll let you guess which 2 they are. Anyway, wow, No Name November. I remember that tradition. When I was in high school, Wait, this doesn't even apply to me, Everett. Ugh. If I've told him once, I've told him 100 times. I can't remember anything before my first year of culinary school, thanks to that memory curse I gave myself for mistaking basil for oregano. I'm just gonna skip over this part. We all know it was a good story. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out some of our other transmissions. We're adding them regularly, and we'd love to have you as part of the Dusklight family by subscribing, hitting the bell of our ever-present shadow government. They already have your information anyway, so you may as well comply. And leave a comment with stories you love for Everett's many-legged runners to find. Now, my dears, let's all sing our praises to our Patreon supporters. First, our Sturgeon faithfuls, Haley Clark, Foe, PRDDL12, Sabrina Alexander, Jason Webb, and Laree W. Purple Crayon Eaters Mary Peck, Square, Gianni Di Lorena, Feeny Von Karma, and Max, who seem to have gorged their fill on pigmented wax this week and have moved on to other, more sentient things. Ugh. Our janitors, Alex Nunez, Amy Shawn, Ethan Nelson, and Arkham Cookie, who have apparently learned that mops can be used in the place of canes for their Fred Astaire tribute act, and are diligently rehearsing as we speak. Our nightmare detective, Adrian Rodriguez, who is currently searching each and every Sturgeon antique store for what he deems to be the correct magnifying glass, whatever that means. Our Voidwalker, Evan Diaz, who I think just walked by my window. Hi, Evan! And a huge welcome again to our newest arrival into town, Clue Blackwell. During the broadcast, I looked up the prophecy, and apparently, it reads that Clue sentiency means that the apocalypse is coming in approximately 8 to 66,000 business days. So, it might be totally fine, but, perhaps start preparing your shelters, just in case. Clue joins our other Blackwell family members, Jackal Blackwell, who does, in fact, have all the red lines of the conspiracy board pointing straight to him, as expected. Tabitha Blackwell, who has heard the phrase creating a mountain out of a molehill, thought it was stupid, and is currently training to create mountains out of slightly bigger mountains instead. And of course our dear friend Papakaya Blackwell, who is currently polishing a set of binoculars made entirely from the bones of various small animals, in the hopes of seeing into the depths of your innermost thoughts and desires. Yikes. We love you and fear you, Papa. We thank you humbly for your patronage and look to see you bright and early for Dusklight orientation. Purple crayons and existential dread will be provided. If you want to be a patron, we have a link in the description below. You'll get early access to all videos, exclusive Sturgeon stories, and exclusive Sturgeon-focused D&D/Monster of the Week content, and more. And one last time, listeners, close your eyes and breathe with me. Remember, no matter how bad things are, how cruel people can be, and how heavy your shoulders may feel with the weight of the world bearing down on them, Dusklight will always be here to lift the load and provide you with some respite. Drink a Pacific Cooler Capri Sun, have some dino-shaped nuggies, watch a video about bats eating bananas, and sleep on the cool side of the pillow with the window open and the stars twinkling down on you. Start and end each day with kindness in your heart. You matter, you are loved, and every day is another chance. I'll see you again when the sun sets and dusk enters the station.